Thanks, honey. All right, so I'm going to we're going to talk about writing craft, and a lot of folks in this group know me pretty well and know some of the nuggets that I give them. But when I was asked to do this, I was like, I should be on a subject. So I chose using hooks in your writing and how it influences the reader and how important they are. But anytime you have a question about anything, just break right in, and I'll be happy to answer it. So here's my little presentation. So this is a quote. The human desire to know why is as powerful as the desire to know what happened next, and it is a desire of a higher order. And so that's a quote from Janet Burroway, who influenced my writing very well, very much so, with her book on fiction writing. So a lot of what I talk about with hooks, even though I'm a fiction writer, applies to memoir, applies to short stories, applies to novels. And the human is very curious. And, that's very, very important to set something up and get them to anticipate what's next and to find it interesting, because the big thing is with this is what you want is you must prevent people from putting your book or your story down. And that is something that will happen if you don't grab them. Unfortunately, we're very high, high stimulus type of country. There's the internet, there's streaming TV shows. If you don't hook them in a book immediately, definitely within the first couple of chapters, if they're a reader, they're gonna move to the next book, or they're going to stop reading your book. Even Anna's Guide with a memoir, familiar with Anna David's Guide. Anna used to run this group. She used to present us with a memoir writing guide, which says you open the memoir with the most intense failure or the most intense moment of conflict in your life, and then you work your way back to it, because that's the hook, and that's also the anticipatory situation. So one thing you can do with hooks, and always remember with hooks, is you are talking about and you're engaging your reader in who, what, where, and why, without necessarily asking it as a question. And I'm talking about your opening sentence, your opening paragraph. Now, all opening sentences in any long work should do this. And even the introduction, and I'm talking about when your book starts, the introduction doesn't necessarily count, but even the introduction should have a hook to it, and the introduction should be used as a hook. But it tends not to be as dramatic. The introduction basically shows you how you relate to the story, relates to the memoir, but it's not like you're not going to give everything away as dramatic. So without a hook, what happens to the reader is they subconsciously think, I hope this gets better. And you don't want them in that situation. You want to hook them. We all are creatures of endorphins. So that's something to remember. So a fiction story. So think a second about this, and then blurt out what you think a good hook to open this is. So here's a story about someone who was, let me give you a subject here, intentionally poisoned at a spaghetti dinner. Give me the opening sentence.
I thought I was going to die.
Good hook. Anybody else? Come up with a different one.
It didn't taste funny.
Okay.
My throat felt like it was on fire.
Yes. But also, I think all of you need a little more background. Like when I put the spaghetti in my mouth, my throat felt like it was on fire. It didn't taste good. Don't be afraid to spell it out in the hook. It didn't taste good. Little did I know it was poison. So Jenna, we're talking about hooks and opening sentences, and what I gave people is give me a dramatic opening of a story about being poisoned at a spaghetti dinner.
Here's to you, Carlo. Carlo swallowed hard.
So remember who, what, where, and why. So here's an example of a no. We went out to a spaghetti dinner one night. So you try to avoid once upon a time. Once upon a time in an Italian restaurant. All right. Yes, I put a fork of spaghetti into my mouth when Luigi keeled over dead. I just put a fork of spaghetti into my mouth when Luigi keeled over dead at the table next to me. No, Luigi and I like a good meal. We went to Bertucci's. Yes, Luigi and I like a good meal, but the very last one he would ever eat was the night he was poisoned at Bertucci's. So along those lines, like you don't want things like opening sentence or even opening paragraph that has to do with the king died, then the queen died, but rather the king died and the queen followed, killed by grief. You know, so a hook will give you information, but you don't always have to go on that information train. Just use it as a hook and then go on. For novels and longer works, cliffhangers are really, really important. If you think about like TV serials, like tune in next week for this, or even have like Better Call Saul. They always end on this dramatic thing that makes you want to watch the next episode. You don't want to necessarily do it strongly every single chapter because then it becomes kind of cliche within your own work, but definitely work on the hard cliffhanger and the short cliffhanger, and cliffhangers will tie and hook people into the next chapter because you don't want them to stop for any reason. I mean, once you stop, you can lose them.
Sorry, Tim, in your example, which it's appearing that this is a comedy, but it may not be because we're doing this in a lighthearted way. So, reading something like The Confederacy of Dunces, which opens up with, it doesn't even mention the name of the character, just a big fat head with green ear flaps, right? So something like, like the meaty red jowls were just spilling out of the white collar, out of his white collar or something, and the jowls connected to a head with piercing beady eyes, always scanning for the exit.
Yeah. And that's an example of the why. You're hooking them with the why. Like, why are we in this world?
Right.
What are we setting up? So we're talking about also well, let's just jump back about a little bit. Has everyone read The Great Gatsby? Or
Years ago.
All right, so without knowing the opening sentence or a hook, I want people to give me an opening sentence of The Great Gatsby that involves a hook. I feel like a high school teacher. You didn't read The Great Gatsby? You didn't do your homework? I hope you didn't watch the movie. And The Great Gatsby
barely remember it. I can barely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember enough about it to be able to come up with an opening sentence. What is the actual opening sentence?
Yeah, the actual opening sentence is quite famous, and I don't know
it. For 2 years, Carmine has been on my case about going to Zamboni's for dinner. And so now you know the name of the character, you know that there's somebody narrating, you know that there's a place called, I don't know, Zamboni, whatever. But and now somebody's going to put arsenic, some kind of strychnine in the spaghetti sauce, and that opens it up to a whodunit almost.
Yep. So here's the opening line to The Great Gatsby. You ready? In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. So, you're kind of setting up the conflict then. You're setting up a whole class type of situation. Tying chapters together or segments together. there's kind of two ways to do it. So when you do it back to back, you almost want to jump into the action again on the next chapter segment, but sometimes it's a point of view shift that works. You don't want it to appear like it's just a continuation of the previous chapter. You want to put the hook at the end, and then you opening the chapter with, like, say the hook is, Buddy felt the world was, after all of this, Buddy felt the entire world was against him. End of chapter. Next chapter. But Helen didn't think that. It doesn't stand on its own, but you're hooking them in, and now you're in Helen's point of view. Also, what works, and this works well with memoirs, especially what Margie's writing with the signposts and jumping back in time to the same place, back and forth. It's kind of like the meanwhile. Meanwhile, remember back when I was working out for the triathlon. So what happens with that is that hook needs to draw back to the previous couple chapters back. And usually if you've written a good book, it will do so automatically just by mentioning the person's name. It's kind of like, oh, wait, we're talking about Buddy again. I like what was going on with Buddy way back when. Let's pick it up where we left off. For memoirs, it's signposts. And even Anna's outline does that. And Anna's outline will bring you in a memoir up to the point of conflict. So in that one, and I also like to, I've added on to that too, that, you start with the most traumatic, conflictual point in your life, and then you go back to childhood and you work your way up and you build what led to that. And then, there's the resolve at the end. I think also you can do the most successful point in your life as well, and then build up to that and how you overcame your conflicts building up to that. Either way works. That's all a hook. The entire outline is a hook. So this is basically an example of how anticipation is a hook. So you're going to anticipate the ending. This is why this is happening. What's happening next? I can't wait to find out what's happening. So in the memoir example, you kind of know that you've started this book in this, either in this, terrible point in your life or a great point in your life. And so the hook is anticipating how you're building up to that, where you're headed. You've already set up so say the opening paragraph was, when I was 23, I fell off a building and became paralyzed. But the memoir is about, how you ended up becoming this multi-million-dollar successful person. So already the anticipation of that is the hook, and you're building up toward that. And you're not giving anything new away. It's no surprise ending. It's kind of like, what were the steps that led you here? And, that's a natural hook. So with anticipation, there's five sources of build. And this works. And basically, this is used in fiction a lot, but also I find it works well with memoir and nonfiction. So you start with the ground situation, and this is after the major thing that I stated, or the most successful. So you get the person grounded, who you are, what is the scene. In fiction, sense of place, sense of scene, a sense of character, light sense of conflict. And then you want to set up the conflict. Like, what happened? Why is this? And that can be done either directly or indirectly. And that's something that's building. And up to number 3, you're using the complications and the dramatic action to build that conflict. So in The Great Gatsby, you sort of set up the conflict between the classes, right? And then it builds and builds and builds. And you see how the characters interact and intertwine within that. And the dramatic actions totally builds until the climax in The Great Gatsby, and then the denouement, which is the climax and the outcome to the climax, and then the resolution. What have we learned here? And you know, for the memoir, for example, the climax is almost the beginning, but you're building up to here again. And then it's sort of like that's before, but the resolution is like, what has the character learned? What have I learned? And without getting too pompous about it, because that can be a turnoff too. But then again, they've already read 99% of your book at that point. Just kind of like, you know, this is the lesson learned without being on the soapbox. So basically, that's really all I have to say about hooks and the importance of them. Just remember the whole key is you don't want someone to put your book down. You want them to keep going, because it's a real challenge. Believe it or not, it's a real challenge to read a book these days, to finish a book. And, you know, think about any books that you've put down yourself in these terms. You might not have realized why you put them down, but, you know, the bottom line is, you know, there was no hook, there was no climbs. Maybe it just was crappy writing. And, you know, and that's something that I am not going to even get into here because you guys are all really good writers. But, you know, you also need to, you know, figure out how not to make it dull, how not to have a section that really, really drags. And obviously in every book, there's a section that will drag a little bit. But if you're dragging for 50 to 100 pages, you know what, your reader is going to have a whole lot of trouble finishing your book.
I have a question.
Or your story. Yeah, I can take questions on this. I don't take questions on writing in general. I know that I gave everyone a homework assignment to watch that video and have any follow-up questions if you did. So Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, this is not so much on the writing, but as the writer, as you're putting together this narrative arc, and that the character starts at a place, and then the character changes because that character has to change for it to be a story, right? And then you have a resolution. How do you, as when you are writing, to separate yourself from the actual? Do you even separate yourself from the actual story? Because part of what I'm learning is I've got to be able to not think objectively about what the reader wants, what I'm trying to do, and just do it because I need to be in it in order to tell the story. Does that make any sense?
It does, and I think every writer gets involved within their own story at different levels or not. I also know that a lot of institutions of higher education are finding stories are much flatter than they used to be. So the arc, as you suggested, is a hook. The narrative arc, when people talk about the narrative arc, it's because it makes sense. Why? Because people want to anticipate through that arc, because that's sort of how they're used to reading stories or reading books. But also, it's like a narrative arc, by definition, is kind of setting up the increase in action and the increase in the build up in a pace. And with narrative arc, it's all about pace, in a pace that makes sense to the reader. It doesn't slow down too much. It's not too quick. So, but to answer your question, do you have to be fully involved and weave yourself into the writing part, into the story to have it work? I mean, I think whatever, it works differently for different people. I know that for me, I don't necessarily realize that I'm doing it until I finish the book. And then I'm kind of like, you know, it's almost as if my characters went away on vacation. It's like, okay, like who do I talk to now? Like, because I think a good writer, especially a writer of fiction, really needs to go into the mind of the characters. They need to be able to distinguish, and also with memoir, you're introducing a character, a person in real life, you have to get into them, you have to visually see them, you have to make other people hear them, yet their dialect, how they sound, how they look. And if you're writing fiction, you become that person, how they sound and how they look, because you have to jump, you have to multitask in all these different characters and make them different, because it's really obvious when all your characters sound the same, look the same, have similar dialogues. Like I think Ray, for example, does it really well. Like, you know, all of his characters are distinct and you know what's going on. with each one when they get introduced. Like, uh-oh, here's the guy that reminds me of Rupert T. Puffer, and oh crap, and here he is again. Like, I don't like, you know, exactly. The reader's memory gets engaged. And so I think the more, Eric, the more you put yourself into as a writer, the character, the more the reader is going to separate the character. I saw a hand up by Barbara.
Okay, how do I phrase this? Okay, I've read like, yeah, it's a question, but I have to tell you what, I have to give you, okay. So I've read about 10 memoirs about addiction recovery, you know, and there's 3 that really stood out to me. In fact, I got to know 2 of the authors, but you like the person pretty much all the way through the book, even if they're doing terrible things and blah, 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 blah. So this book that I'm going to help someone write, he has to make himself likable. I mean, he is likable, but I don't know. I'm just confused. I don't want people to not want to read it just based on him being a drug dealer. I don't know. That's the hard part for me, is like, is he going to be likable like the guys in the books that I read that I got to know? Or is he going to be like, I don't care about this guy, you know, because they weren't drug dealers, they were addicts. And he doesn't have an ending to his story yet. He's going to prison. So it's hard. You know what I'm saying?
So in traditional story form, I mean, the best example of an unlikable character that moves the story is probably Walter White in Breaking Bad. Like, so
Yeah.
I don't think your friend who you're helping write the book for being in jail, I don't think he's unlikable enough, because he's kind of a run, and I don't take this the wrong way. He's kind of a run-of-the-mill drug dealer that went to jail. So how do we make him likable? You know, the story's, as you said, it's not done yet. Maybe he'll come up with an epiphany while he's in jail. Maybe you need to guide him into being like, what was he like as a child? Who did he help? How did he end up this way? And what does he want from the rest of his life? Because you and I both know he's not sitting in jail like, I can't wait to deal drugs in jail. How do I figure this out? Right.
Right.
So if he stays in jail, what does he want in his life? What does he envision when he's released? And if he doesn't come out of jail, how has that change happened? And you know what? And the thing is, if he doesn't want to change as a human being and he wants to come out and do exactly what he did that got himself in jail, you may not have a book there.
Right. He has to change. I mean, yeah. And he did have a traumatic childhood, sexual abuse and all that. So that's part of why he's done some of the things he's done.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
thanks.
you know,
That's very helpful.
and needless to say, you know, maybe that type of book will, you know, increase his drug business. But you know, that's that's a whole different lecture about how to create a brand around your book. But
If I could
you.
just chime in just for a second, Barbara, I work with prisoners. I've worked with prisoners for about 20 years. What's interesting, what you're saying is not knowing the story, and the story will be revealed to him, you possibly. And I think it's great that you're working with this guy to bring this out, whatever the story is going to be. I mean, there's an uncertainty because you don't know the ending yet. But what all these guys have in common, you know, especially the ones who have something in common and want to tell the story, have some sort of contrition. You know, there's a need to, probably all of them, and I don't say everybody, but they grew up in a place where there was a moral floor, where there was a parent, possibly a broken home, but maybe there was somebody who was helping them, but then something happened. Now, whether it was drugs, whether it was sexual abuse, whether it was growing up in an alcoholic or crazy household, whether it was somebody introducing somebody to something that became addictive, you know, it always comes down to to not shutting the door on that part of one's life and having the courage to go back there and to resolve things. And that may or may not help you. So I just decided to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, Eric just introduced a whole bunch of things the way it must go. And, using the basic memoir guidelines that we've been talking about, it has to go. There has to be change indicated, or the desire to change. So that's
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, that was great.
yeah. Any other questions that we have for Kraft?
I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to hog the oxygen, so I'll shut up.
I want to make sure there's enough people breathing here. Anyone have any questions just in general, from the video that I threw out in the newsletter? All right, let me move and ask. I know Ray's done with his book, so it's probably not going to help him, but Jenna started a book and Mary's working on a book. So Jenna, what are you planning to use for a hook on yours? And again, textbooks don't need a hook, but this isn't a textbook. So how are you going to set up and maybe explain to Mary what you're writing and how you're going to kind of tie it together with hooks if you've thought of it already?
This is a great question. So, hi, Mary. Nice to meet you. I'm Jenna.
Hi, thank you.
I'm writing a book. I just took a 6-month break, but I'm going back to writing a book that is basically a commentary on a very old Vedantic text. But I want to write the commentary in modern language, how this relates to people in the modern age and how they can take what's in this book and use it in a practice. So that's where this is going to be different. Like, it's a commentary, but it's also going to involve very specific practices that people can do to, do everything from gain self-realization to like lessen depression, lessen stress, live more mindfully, like all these types of things, how we can use this to achieve the goals that we want to do. So I've never thought about a hook, but while we were sitting here, I thought, well, maybe I could do a hook by addressing a pain point. Whether that be, could be stress, or it could be confusion or lack of clarity, whatever their pain point is, put that as the hook to keep them reading. So that's I never thought about a hook before. So this is really, or the anticipation. I've never thought of any of that. I was just,
yeah. If you remember Heather Campbell's book, how basically what it was about wasn't necessarily what it was about, but all those other things worked as hooks.
Yeah.
So like that's a great example of that. Mary, did you have any thoughts about anything that was discussed here, or anything that you might be able to apply to your book?
I did. I was really impressed with the hook situation. That was real clear, and I really appreciate the hook situation because that's what I was looking at too. How do I maintain my audience? How do I keep my audience engaged? Because I think I have some hooks on here, but I wonder how powerful are my hooks? Is
Yeah.
my question.
And also, if you're like someone famous or well known, like that's already the hook, right? Like if you're a millionaire, like the whole hook is how I made my million and how I can make you make your million. That's the whole hook.
Uh-huh. Now, I do have a question that's not on this subject, but I would be interested in the answer.
Sure.
Okay, my deceased husband wrote a book of poetry, and it was never really published. How do I publish that? And can I publish it?
Yeah, there's There's two ways to do it.
I designed the cover.
Yeah, and in terms of can you legally, yes, you can, unless somebody in his family objects to it. But I think as his legal wife, they have no objection to it legally, just saying. So there are two ways to do it. If he was well known in the poetry community, or if if he's well known, you try to get a local publisher that knew him to put it out. That's kind of an easy route. If he wasn't well known and these are just poems that he had in a notebook and he was as they say, a closet poet, if the stuff is great, a publisher might want it. But I mean, self-publishing or independently publishing, something like that. I mean, you can do that through Amazon. You can do that through Lightning Source
The stuff
yourself.
is great. I'm telling you.
Has he
The
been
stuff
published?
is great.
Has his work been
Excuse me?
published anywhere?
No,
Okay.
we just they just took it to the what do you call it? Like a Kinko's and had it printed and bind it.
Yeah. So I would look into Amazon and it doesn't cost you anything and just get it bound as a perfectly bound book and put it out there into the world, or Lulu as well. Lulu.com will do it. And that way, people can buy it or check it out. And just you may need to go through a designer, the people that know how to make the books, make the pages fit into book form. You may need to an art.
I did all of that.
Okay. So I look into Amazon, feed the PDF into the system, make sure the cover has enough pixels to go. And there's a lot of if you don't know how to do it through Amazon yourself, go to some Facebook group and ask for help. And there's certainly a lot of people that have done it that will be able to do it really, really easily and probably not even charge you.
I have a question for Mary, if it's all right.
Yeah.
Permission to ask. Why do you want to publish your husband's work? What's the desire?
Because he and I had worked on it prior, and we had always talked about doing it.
Okay.
The poetry is actually, and you know what's funny about it? He wrote poems about myself, all of his children, my sister-in-law's friends, life. Yeah.
All right. So to get it out there, have it live forever, which is
And it's
nice.
called A Cup Full of Tears.
Awesome. Well, we'll look forward to it coming out. So now that you've mentioned it, it's got to come out. So it's like that writing adage that like if you put a gun in a book, make sure the guns don't have to fire at some point. So you mentioned there's a poetry book you want to publish. That's the gun.
Putting spaghetti and meatballs, someone has to eat it. What happens, we don't know.
Yep.
But
Anybody else have any questions?
I would like to know, just to keep in the loop here, just some maybe some administrative stuff. What's happening on Thursday nights? What's happening on Sundays? What are these? I know that we get the blast. Are these things interrelated? And that's this kind of stuff that.
I don't know what's happening on Thursday or Sundays. Well,
you're doing the Thursday night thing, right?
yeah,
So-
I do the Dire Literary Series every other Thursday, which has an open mic and it's free to go to, and there's a feature.
Right, right. I
And
usually end up planning my weekends. I don't know, not a week in advance, but just like, well, because of what's happening with my wife, and in her medical situation, things are very up in the air. But knowing this stuff on a Friday is helpful. So if I don't know, just like knowing where there's going to be readings and stuff like that. I'm
Okay.
plugged into the New England Poetry Club, so I can get that stuff from David Miller. But any other stuff that I'm missing, I'd like to know.
Okay. All right, unless no one has questions.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you.
We can end the recording here. If I can find where it ends.